What a jumble! What a jumble! I must tidy up my mind. Since they cut out my tongue, another tongue, it seems, has been constantly wagging somewhere in my skull. Something has been talking, or someone, that suddenly falls silent, and then it all begins again. Oh, I hear too many things I never utter. What a jumble! And if I open my mouth, it's like pebbles rattling together. Order and method, the tongue says, and then goes on talking of other matters simultaneously. Yes, I always longed for order. At least one thing is certain. I am waiting for the missionary who is to come and take my place. Here I am on the trail, an hour away from Terrassa, hidden in a pile of rocks, sitting on my old rifle. Day is breaking over the desert. It's still very cold. Soon it will be too hot. This country drives men mad, and I've been here I don't know how many years. No, just a little longer. The missionary is to come this morning or this evening. I've heard he'll come with a guide. Perhaps they'll have but one camel between them. I'll wait. I am waiting. It's only the cold making me shiver. Just be patient a little longer, lousy slave. But I have been patient for so long. When I was home on that high plateau of the Massif Central, my coarse father, my boorish mother, the wine, the pork soup every day, the wine above all, sour and cold, and the long winter, the frigid wind, the snowdrifts, the revolting bracken. Oh, I wanted to get away, leave them all at once and begin to live at last, in the sunlight, with fresh water. I believed the priest. He spoke to me of the seminary. He tutored me daily. He had plenty of time in that Protestant region, where he used to hug the walls as he crossed the village. He told me of the future and of the sun. Catholicism is the sun, he used to say. And he would get me to read. He beat Latin into my hard head. The kid's bright, but he's pig-headed. My head was so hard that, despite all my falls, it has never once bled in my life. Bullheaded, my pig of a father used to say. At the seminary they were proud as punch. A recruit from the Protestant region was a victory. They greeted me like the sun at Austerlitz. The sun was pale and feeble, to be sure, because of the alcohol. They have drunk sour wine, and the children's teeth are set on edge. Gra gra. One really ought to kill one's father, but after all, there's no danger that he'll hurl himself into missionary work, since he's now long dead. The tart wine eventually cut through his stomach, so there's nothing left but to kill the missionary. I have something to settle with him and with his teachers, with my teachers who deceived me. With the whole of lousy Europe, everybody deceived me. Missionary work, that's all they could say. Go out to the savages and tell them, "Here is my Lord, just look at him. He never strikes or kills. He issues his orders in a low voice. He turns the other cheek. He's the greatest of masters. Choose him. Just see how much better. He's made me. Offend me, and you will see." Yes, I believed. Gra gra. And I felt better. I had put on weight. I was almost handsome. I wanted to be offended. When we would walk out in tight black rows in summer, under Grenoble's hot sun, and would meet girls in cotton dresses, I didn't look away. I despised them. I waited for them to offend me, and sometimes they would laugh. At such times I would think, let them strike me and spit in my face. But their laughter, to tell the truth, came to the same thing, bristling with teeth and quips that tore me to shreds. The offense and the suffering were sweet to me. My confessor couldn't understand when I used to heap accusations on myself. No, there's good in you. Good. There was nothing but sour wine in me, and that was all for the best. How can a man become better if he's not bad? I had grasped that in everything they taught me. That's the only thing I did grasp, a single idea. And pig-headed bright boy, I carried it to its logical conclusion. I went out of my way for punishments. I groused at the normal. In short, I too wanted to be an example in order to be noticed, and so that after noticing me, people would give credit to what had made me better. Through me praise my Lord. Fierce sun. It's rising. The desert is changing. It has lost its mountain cyclamen color. Oh, my mountain. And the snow, the soft, enveloping snow. No, it's a rather grayish yellow. the ugly moment before the great resplendence. Nothing, still nothing from here to the horizon over yonder, where the 38 plateau disappears in a circle of still soft colors. Behind me, the trail climbs to the dune-hiding Tagasa, whose iron name has been beating in my head for so many years. The first to mention it to me was the half-blind old priest who had retired to our monastery. But why do I say the first? He was the only one, and it wasn't the city of salt, the white walls under the blinding sun, that struck me in his account, but the cruelty of the savage inhabitants and the town closed to all outsiders. Only one of those who had tried to get in, one alone, to his knowledge, had lived to relate what he had seen. They had whipped him and driven him out into the desert after having put salt on his wounds and in his mouth. He had met nomads who for once were compassionate, a stroke of luck. And since then I'd been dreaming about his tale, about the fire of the salt in the sky, about the house of the fetish and his slaves. Could anything more barbarous, more exciting be imagined? Yes, that was my mission, and I had to go and reveal to them my Lord. They all expatiated on the subject at the seminary to discourage me, pointing out the necessity of waiting, that it was not missionary country, that I wasn't ready yet. I had to prepare myself specially, know who I was, and even then I had to go through tests. Then they would see. But go on waiting. Ah, no. Yes, if they insisted for the special preparation and the tryouts because they took place at Algiers and brought me closer. But for all the rest, I shook my pig head and repeated the same thing. To get among the most barbarous and live as they did, to show them at home, and even in the house of the fetish, through example, that my Lord's truth would prevail. They would offend me, of course, but I was not afraid of offenses. They were essential to the demonstration, and as a result of the way I endured them, I'd get the upper hand of those savages like a strong sun. Strong, yes, that was the word I constantly had on the tip of my tongue. I dreamed of absolute power, the kind that makes people kneel down, that forces the adversary to capitulate, converts him in short, and the blinder, the crueler he is, the more he's sure of himself, mired in his own conviction, the more his consent establishes the royalty of whoever brought about his collapse. Converting good folk who had strayed somewhat was the shabby ideal of our priests. I despised them for daring so little when they could do so much. They lacked faith. And I had it. I wanted to be acknowledged by the torturers themselves, to fling them on their knees and make them say, "O Lord, here is thy victory," to rule in short by the sheer force of words over an army of the wicked. Oh, I was sure of reasoning logically on that subject, never quite sure of myself otherwise, but once I get an idea I don't let go of it. That's my strong point. Yes, the strong point of the fellow they all pitied. The sun has risen higher. My forehead is beginning to burn. Around me the stones are beginning to crack open with a dull sound. The only cool thing is the rifle's barrel, cool as the fields, as the evening rain long ago when the soup was simmering. They would wait for me, my father and mother, who would occasionally smile at me. Perhaps I loved them. But that's all in the past. A film of heat is beginning to rise from the trail. Come on, missionary. I'm waiting for you. Now I know how to answer the message. My new masters taught me, and I know they are right. You have to settle accounts with that question of love. When I fled the seminary in Algiers, I had a different idea of the savages, and only one detail of my imaginings was true. They are cruel. I had robbed the treasurer's office, cast off my habit, crossed the Atlas, the upper plateaus and the desert. The bus driver of the Trans-Sahara line made fun of me. Don't go there. He too, what had got into them all? And the gusts of sand for hundreds of wind-blown kilometers, progressing and backing in the face of the wind. Then the mountains again, made up of black peaks and ridges sharp as steel. And after them, it took a guide to go out on the endless sea of brown pebbles, screaming with heat, burning with the fires of 1,000 mirrors, to the spot on the confines of the white country and the land of the blacks, where stands the city of salt. And the money the guide stole from me, ever naive, I had shown it to him. But he left me on the trail. Just about here, it so happens, after having struck me. Dog, there's the way. The honor's all mine. Go ahead. Go on. They'll show you. And they did show me. Oh yes, they're like the sun that never stops, except at night, beating sharply and proudly. That is beating me hard at this moment. Too hard. With a multitude of lances burst from the ground. Oh, shelter, yes, shelter. Under the big rock, before everything gets muddled. The shade here is good. How can anyone live in the city of salt, in the hollow of that basin full of dazzling heat? On each of the sharp right-angle walls, cut out with a pickaxe and coarsely planed, the gashes left by the pickaxe bristle with blinding scales. Pale, scattered sand yellows them somewhat, except when the wind dusts the upright walls and terraces. Then everything shines with dazzling whiteness, under a sky likewise dusted even to its blue rind. I was going blind during those days when the stationary fire would crackle for hours on the surface of the white terraces that all seemed to meet, as if, in the remote past, they had altogether tackled a mountain of salt, flattened it first, and then had hollowed-out streets, the insides of houses and windows directly in the mass. Or as if, yes, this is more like it, they had cut out their white, burning hell with a powerful jet of boiling water just to show that they could live where no one ever could. 30 days' travel from any living thing, in this hollow in the middle of the desert, where the heat of day prevents any contact among creatures, separates them by a portcullis of invisible flames and of searing crystals, where without transition the cold of night congeals them individually in their rock-salt shells, nocturnal dwellers in a dried-up ice floe, black Eskimos suddenly shivering in their cubicle igloos, black because they wear long black garments, and the salt that collects even under their nails, that they continue tasting bitterly and swallowing during the sleep of those polar nights. The salt they drink in the water from the only spring in the hollow of a dazzling groove often spots their dark garments with something like the trail of snails after a rain. Rain. O Lord, just one real rain, long and hard, rain from your heaven. Then at last the hideous city, gradually eaten away, would slowly and irresistibly cave in, and, utterly melted in a slimy torrent, would carry off its savage inhabitants toward the sands. Just one rain, Lord. But what do I mean, what Lord? They are the lords and masters. They rule over their sterile homes, over their black slaves that they work to death in the mines, and each slab of salt that is cut out is worth a man in the region to the south. They pass by, silent, wearing their mourning veils in the mineral whiteness of the streets, and at night, when the whole town looks like a milky phantom, they stoop down and enter the shade of their homes, where the salt walls shine dimly. They sleep with a weightless sleep, and as soon as they wake, they give orders. They strike. They say they are a united people, that their God is the true God, and that one must obey. They are my masters. They are ignorant of pity and, like masters, they want to be alone, to progress alone, to rule alone. Because they alone had the daring to build in the salt and the sands a cold, torrid city. And I, what a jumble when the heat rises, I'm sweating, they never do. Now the shade itself is heating up. I feel the sun on the stone above me. It's striking like a hammer on all the stones, and it's the music, the vast music of noon, air and stones vibrating over hundreds of kilometers. Gra. I hear the silence as I did once before. Yes, it was the same silence years ago that greeted me when the guards led me to them, in the sunlight, in the center of the square, whence the concentric terraces rose gradually toward the lid of hard blue sky, sitting on the edge of the basin. There I was, thrown on my knees in the hollow of that white shield, my eyes corroded by the swords of salt and fire issuing from all the walls, pale with fatigue, my ear bleeding from the blow given by my guide, and they, tall and black, looked at me without saying a word. The day was at its mid-course. Under the blows of the iron sun, the sky resounded at length, a sheet of white-hot tin. It was the same silence, and they stared at me. Time passed. They kept on staring at me, and I couldn't face their stares. I panted more and more violently. Eventually I wept, and suddenly they turned their backs on me in silence, and all together went off in the same direction. On my knees, all I could see, in the red and black sandals, was their feet sparkling with salt as they raised the long black gowns, the tip rising somewhat, the heel striking the ground lightly. And when the square was empty, I was dragged to the house of the fetish. Squatting, as I am today in the shelter of the rock, and the fire above my head pierces the rock's thickness, I spent several days within the dark of the house of the fetish, somewhat higher than the others, surrounded by a wall of salt, but without windows, full of a sparkling night. Several days, and I was given a basin of brackish water and some grain that was thrown before me the way chickens are fed. I picked it up. By day, the door remained closed, and yet the darkness became less oppressive, as if the irresistible sun managed to flow through the masses of salt. No lamp, but by feeling my way along the walls, I touched garlands of dried palms decorating the walls, and, at the end, a small door, coarsely fitted, of which I could make out the bolt with my fingertips. Several days, long after, I couldn't count the days or the hours, but my handful of grain had been thrown me some 10 times, and I had dug out a hole for my excrements that I covered up in vain. The stench of an animal den hung on anyway. Long after, yes, the door opened wide and they came in. One of them came toward me, where I was squatting in a corner. I felt the burning salt against my cheek. I smelled the dusty scent of the palms. I watched him approach. They watched me moaning in the unbearable heat of the unbroken daylight that came in the wide open door. And in that light suddenly appeared the sorcerer, with his raffia hair, his chest covered with a breastplate of pearls, his legs bare under a straw skirt, wearing a mask of reeds and wire with 2 square openings for the eyes. He was followed by musicians and women wearing heavy motley gowns that revealed nothing of their bodies. They danced in front of the door at the end, but a coarse, scarcely rhythmical dance. They just barely moved. And finally, the sorcerer opened the little door behind me. The masters did not stir. They were watching me. I turned around and saw the fetish, his double axe head, his iron nose twisted like a snake. I was carried before him, to the foot of the pedestal. I was made to drink a black, bitter water, and at once my head began to burn. I was laughing. That's the offense. I have been offended. They undressed me, shaved my head and body, washed me in oil, beat my face with cords dipped in water and salt, and I laughed and turned my head away. But each time 2 women would take me by the ears and offer my face to the sorcerer's blows, while I could see only his square eyes. I was still laughing, covered with blood. They stopped. No one spoke but me. The jumble was beginning in my head. Then they lifted me up and forced me to raise my eyes toward the fetish. I had ceased laughing. I knew that I was now consecrated to him, to serve him, adore him. No, I was not laughing anymore. Fear and pain stifled me. And there, in that white house, between those walls, that the sun was assiduously burning on the outside, my face taut, my memory exhausted. Yes, I tried to pray to the fetish. He was all there was, and even his horrible face was less horrible than the rest of the world. Then it was that my ankles were tied with a cord that permitted just 1 step. They danced again, but this time in front of the fetish. The masters went out one by one. The door once closed behind them. The music again, and the sorcerer lighted a bark fire around which he pranced. His long silhouette broke on the angles of the white walls, fluttered on the flat surfaces, filled the room with dancing shadows. He traced a rectangle in a corner to which the woman dragged me. I felt their dry and gentle hands. They set before me a bowl of water and a little pile of grain and pointed to the fetish. I grasped that I was to keep my eyes fixed on him. Then the sorcerer called them one after the other over to the fire. He beat some of them who moaned, and who then went and prostrated themselves before the fetish, my god, while the sorcerer kept on dancing, and he made them all leave the room until only one was left, quite young, squatting near the musicians, and not yet beaten. He held her by a shock of hair, which he kept twisting around his wrist. She dropped backward with eyes popping until she finally fell on her back. Dropping her, the sorcerer screamed. The musicians turned to the wall, while behind the square-eyed mask, the scream rose to an impossible pitch, and the woman rolled on the ground in a sort of fit, and at last on all fours, her head hidden in her locked arms, she too screamed, but with a hollow, muffled sound. And in this position, without ceasing to scream and to look at the fetish, the sorcerer took her nimbly and nastily, without the woman's face being visible, for it was covered with the heavy folds of her garment. And, wild as a result of the solitude, I screamed too, yes, howled with fright toward the fetish, until a kick hurled me against the wall, biting the salt as I am biting this rock today with my tongueless mouth, while waiting for the man I must kill. Now the sun has gone a little beyond the middle of the sky. Through the breaks in the rock I can see the hole it makes in the white-hot metal of the sky. A mouth voluble as mine, constantly vomiting rivers of flame over the colorless desert. On the trail in front of me, nothing. No cloud of dust on the horizon. Behind me, they must be looking for me. No, not yet. It's only in the late afternoon that they open the door and I could go out a little. After having spent the day cleaning the house of the fetish, set out fresh offerings, and in the evening the ceremony would begin, in which I was sometimes beaten, at others not. But always I served the fetish whose image is engraved in iron in my memory, and now in my hope also. Never had a god so possessed or enslaved me. My whole life, day and night, was devoted to him, and pain, and the absence of pain. Wasn't that joy? Were due him, and even, yes, desire, as a result of being present almost every day, at that impersonal and nasty act which I heard without seeing it, inasmuch as I now had to face the wall or else be beaten. But, my face up against the salt, obsessed by the bestial shadows moving on the wall, I listened to the long scream. My throat was dry. A burning, sexless desire squeezed my temples and my belly, as in a vice. Thus the days followed one another. I barely distinguished them, as if they had liquefied in the torrid heat and the treacherous reverberation from the walls of salt. Time had become merely a vague lapping of waves in which there would burst out, at regular intervals, screams of pain or possession. A long ageless day in which the fetish ruled as this fierce sun does over my house of rocks. And now, as I did then, I weep with unhappiness and longing. A wicked hope consumes me. I want to betray. I lick the barrel of my gun and its soul inside. Its soul, only guns have souls, oh yes. The day they cut out my tongue, I learned to adore the immortal soul of hatred. What a jumble, what a rage, gra-gra, drunk with heat and wrath, lying prostrate on my gun. Who's panting here? I can't endure this endless heat, this waiting. I must kill him. Not a bird, not a blade of grass, stone, an arid desire. Their screams, this tongue within me talking, and, since they mutilated me, the long, flat, deserted suffering deprived even of the water of night, the night of which I would dream, when locked in with the god, in my den of salt. Night alone with its cool stars and dark fountains could save me, carry me off at last from the wicked gods of mankind, but ever locked up I could not contemplate it. If the newcomer tarries more, I shall see it at least rise from the desert and sweep over the sky, a cold golden vine that will hang from the dark zenith, and from which I can drink at length, moisten this black dried hole that no muscle of live flexible flesh revives now. Forget at last that day when madness took away my tongue. How hot it was, really hot. The salt was melting, or so it seemed to me. The air was corroding my eyes, and the sorcerer came in without his mask. Almost naked under grayish tatters, a new woman followed him and her face, covered with a tattoo reproducing the mask of the fetish, expressed only in idol's ugly stupor. The only thing alive about her was her thin, flat body that flopped at the foot of the god when the sorcerer opened the door of the niche. Then he went out without looking at me. The heat rose. I didn't stir. The fetish looked at me over that motionless body whose muscles stirred gently, and the woman's idol face didn't change when I approached. Only her eyes enlarged as she stared at me. My feet touched hers. The heat then began to shriek, and the idol, without a word, still staring at me with her dilated eyes, gradually slipped onto her back, slowly drew her legs up and raised them as she gently spread her knees. But immediately afterward, Gra, the sorcerer, was lying in wait for me. They all entered and tore me from the woman, beat me dreadfully on the sinful place. What sin? I'm laughing. Where is it and where is virtue? They clapped me against a wall. A hand of steel gripped my jaws. Another opened my mouth, pulled on my tongue until it bled. Was it I screaming with that bestial scream? A cool, cutting caress, yes, cool at last, went over my tongue. When I came to, I was alone in the night, glued to the wall, covered with hardened blood. A gag of strange-smelling dry grasses filled my mouth. It had stopped bleeding, but it was vacant, and in that absence the only living thing was a tormenting pain. I wanted to rise. I fell back, happy, desperately happy to die at last. Death, too, is cool, and its shadow hides no god. I did not die. A new feeling of hatred stood up one day at the same time I did. Walked toward the door of the niche, opened it, closed it behind me. I hated my people. The fetish was there, and from the depths of the hole in which I was, I did more than pray to him. I believed in him and denied all I had believed up to then. Hail. He was strength and power. He could be destroyed but not converted. He stared over my head with his empty, rusty eyes. Hail. He was the master, the only lord, whose indisputable attribute was malice. There are no good masters. For the first time, as a result of offenses, my whole body crying out a single pain, I surrendered to him and approved his maleficent order. I adored in him the evil principle of the world, a prisoner of his kingdom, the sterile city carved out of a mountain of salt, divorced from nature, deprived of those rare and fleeting flowerings of the desert, preserved from those strokes of chance or marks of affection, such as an unexpected cloud or a brief violent downpour that are familiar even to the sun or the sands, the city of order in short, right angles, square rooms, rigid men. I freely became its tortured, hate-filled citizen. I repudiated the long history that had been taught me. I had been misled. Solely the reign of malice was devoid of defects. I had been misled. Truth is square, heavy, thick. It does not admit distinctions. Good is an idle dream, an intention constantly postponed and pursued with exhausting effort, a limit never reached. Its reign is impossible. Only evil can reach its limits and reign absolutely. It must be served to establish its visible kingdom. Then we shall see. But what does then mean? Only evil is present. Down with Europe, reason, honor, and the cross. Yes, I was to be converted to the religion of my masters. Yes, indeed, I was a slave. But if I too become vicious, I cease to be a slave, despite my shackled feet and my mute mouth. Oh, this heat is driving me crazy. The desert cries out everywhere under the unbearable light, and he, the Lord of kindness, whose very name revolts me, I disown him, for I know him now. He dreamed and wanted to lie. His tongue was cut out so that his word would no longer be able to deceive the world. He was pierced with nails even in his head, his poor head like mine now. What a jumble! How weak I am. And the earth didn't tremble, I am sure. It was not a righteous man they had killed. I refuse to believe it. There are no righteous men but only evil masters, who bring about the reign of relentless truth. Yes, the fetish alone has power. He is the sole god of this world. Hatred is his commandment, the source of all life, the cool water, cool like mint that chills the mouth and burns the stomach. Then it was that I changed. They realized it. I would kiss their hands when I met them. I was on their side, never wearying of admiring them. I trusted them. I hoped they would mutilate my people as they had mutilated me. And when I learned that the missionary was to come, I knew what I was to do. That day, like all the others, the same blinding daylight that had been going on so long. Late in the afternoon, a guard was suddenly seen running along the edge of the basin, and a few minutes later, I was dragged to the house of the fetish, and the door closed. One of them held me on the ground in the dark, under threat of his cross-shaped sword, and the silence lasted for a long time, until a strange sound filled the ordinarily peaceful town. Voices that it took me some time to recognize because they were speaking my language. But as soon as they rang out, the point of the sword was lowered toward my eyes. My guard stared at me in silence. Then two voices came closer, and I can still hear them, one asking why that house was guarded and whether they should break in the door, Lieutenant. The other said, "No," sharply. Then added, after a moment, that an agreement had been reached, that the town accepted a garrison of 20 men on condition that they would camp outside the walls and respect the customs. The private laughed. "They're knuckling under." But the officer didn't know, for the first time in any case, they were willing to receive someone to take care of the children, and that would be the chaplain. Later on they would see about the territory. The other said they would cut off the chaplain's, if the soldiers were not there. "Oh, no," the officer answered. "In fact, Father Beffert will come before the garrison. He'll be here in 2 days." That was all I heard, motionless, lying under the sword. I was in pain. A wheel of needles and knives was whirling in me. They were crazy. They were crazy. They were allowing a hand to be laid on the city, on their invincible power, on the true God. And the fellow who was to come would not have his tongue cut out. He would show off his insolent goodness without paying for it, without enduring any offense. The reign of evil would be postponed. There would be doubt again. Again time would be wasted, dreaming of the impossible good, wearing oneself out in fruitless efforts instead of hastening the realization of the only possible kingdom. And I looked at the sword threatening me. O sole power to rule over the world. O power, and the city gradually emptied of its sounds. The door finally opened. I remained alone, burned and bitter, with the fetish. And I swore to him to save my new faith, my true masters, my despotic God, to betray well whatever it might cost me. Gra, the heat is abating a little. The stone has ceased to vibrate. I can go out of my hole. Watch the desert gradually take on yellow and ochre tints that will soon be mauve. Last night I waited until they were asleep. I had blocked the lock on the door. I went out with the same step as usual, measured by the cord. I knew the streets. I knew where to get the old rifle, what gate wasn't guarded. And I reached here just as the night was beginning to fade, around a handful of stars while the desert was getting a little darker. And now it seems days and days that I have been crouching in these rocks. Soon, soon, I hope he comes soon. In a moment they'll begin to look for me. They'll speed over the trails in all directions. They won't know that I left for them, and to serve them better, my legs are weak, drunk with hunger and hate. Oh, over there, Gra, at the end of the trail, 2 camels are growing bigger, ambling along, already multiplied by short shadows. They are running with that lively and dreamy gait they always have. Here they are, here at last. Quick, the rifle, and I load it quickly. O fetish, my God over yonder, may your power be preserved. May the offense be multiplied. May hate rule pitilessly over a world of the damned. May the wicked forever be masters. May the kingdom come, wherein a single city of salt and iron-black tyrants will enslave and possess without pity. And now, gra-gra, fire on pity, fire on impotence and its charity, fire on all that postpones the coming of evil, fire twice. And there they are, toppling over, falling, and the camels flee toward the horizon, where a geyser of blackbirds has just risen in the unchanged sky. I laugh. The fellow is writhing in his detested habit. He is raising his head a little. He sees me, his all-powerful shackled master. Why does he smile at me? I'll crush that smile. How pleasant is the sound of a riffle butt on the face of goodness. Today, at last, all is consummated, and everywhere, in the desert, even hours away from here, jackals sniff the non-existent wind, then set out in a patient trot toward the feast of carrion awaiting them. Victory! I raise my arms to a heaven moved to pity. A lavender shadow is just barely suggested on the opposite side. O nights of Europe, home, childhood, why must I weep in the moment of triumph? He stirred. No, the sound comes from somewhere else, and from the other direction here they come rushing like a flight of dark birds. My masters who fall upon me seize me, ah yes. Strike, they fear their city sacked and howling. They fear the avenging soldiers I called forth. And this is only right upon the sacred city. Defend yourselves now, strike. Strike me first, you possess the truth. O my masters, they will then conquer the soldiers. They'll conquer the word and love. They'll spread over the deserts, cross the seas, fill the light of Europe with their black veils. Strike the belly, yes, strike the eyes. Sow their salt on the continent. All vegetation, all youth will die out, and dumb crowds with shackled feet will plod beside me in the worldwide desert under the cruel sun of the true faith. I'll not be alone. Ah, the pain they cause me. Their rage is good, and on this cross-shaped war saddle where they are now, quartering me. Pity. I'm laughing. I love the blow that nails me down crucified. How silent the desert is. Already night and I am alone. I'm thirsty. Still waiting. Where is the city? Those sounds in the distance. And the soldiers, perhaps the victors. No, it can't be. Even if the soldiers are victorious, they're not wicked enough. They won't be able to rule. They'll still say one must become better. And still millions of men between evil and good, torn, bewildered. O fetish, why hast thou forsaken me? All is over, I'm thirsty, my body is burning, a darker night fills my eyes. This long dream I'm awaking, no, I'm going to die. Dawn is breaking, the first light, daylight for the living, and for me the inexorable sun, the flies. Who is speaking? No one. The sky is not opening up. No, God doesn't speak in the desert. Yet whence comes that voice saying, if you consent to die for hate and power, who will forgive us? Is it another tongue in me, or still that other fellow refusing to die at my feet and repeating, courage, courage, courage? Ah, supposing I were wrong again. Once fraternal men, sole recourse, O solitude, forsake me not. Here, who are you, torn, with bleeding mouth? Is it you, sorcerer? The soldiers defeated you. The salt is burning over there. It's you, my beloved master. Cast off that hate-ridden face. Be good now. We were mistaken. We'll begin all over again. We'll rebuild the city of mercy. I want to go back home. Yes, help me, that's right. Give me your hand. A handful of salt fills the mouth of the garrulous slave.